Here we are for session number 4. This one we're going to be focusing on choosing methods for our NEAs, and this is one of the key things really. Very often when people are told that they need to do a fieldwork project, straight away they think about the actual methods of data collection that they're going to be required to do. Very often people are scared straight away and think, oh no, this means I'm going to have to do a questionnaire and talk to strangers. Well, actually, probably over the next coming weeks and months, doing that type of fieldwork might be a bit more difficult. So one of the things we're going to try and do in this session is give you a bit more awareness about the range and the types of things that you can gather and the different types of fieldwork data collection that there are. So one of the things that I thought might be useful at this stage is to try and gauge a bit of an understanding about the fieldwork and the methods that students who are at A-level across the country have probably been exposed to and have probably used. So we sent a tweet out this weekend on our Twitter page and just asked for geography teachers to contribute and asked them a simple question of what fieldwork experience have your students had before they've done their A-level, before they get to A-level. So by that we mean when you've done fieldwork in GCSE and Key Stage 3, what methods have your students been using? And so we were really grateful that we got lots and lots of replies. And what I was able then to do with those replies is kind of go through them all and tally them up to see which methods came out most often. And that actually enabled us to do a top 10. And I'm going to slim this down to our top 5. These are the top 5 fieldwork methods used before A-level by geography students across this country. And it's useful for us, as I say, to gain a bit of an understanding about what things you guys are doing and what things you've done, and perhaps also what things you haven't yet done, and therefore what things might be useful for us to introduce you to. So number 5 on the most popular charts is the classic pedestrian count. An absolute beauty. This is where you count people. You might do it over 5 minutes or over 1 minute. You might be unlucky if you're told to do it over an hour. That could be a bit boring. But a pedestrian count is a classic traditional method of geography data collection where you kind of gauge how popular an area is or how unpopular it is. This might be useful if you're trying to assess the success of something like a regeneration project or a town centre. And it's a pretty basic thing to do, and it's a fairly straightforward thing to do. I know my daughter, who's 6, did a pedestrian count in our local village just before lockdown, and she said that it was quite an interesting, exciting thing to do as she counted all of the older people making their way to the butchers and the bakers. So there we go. It's a good one to use, and there's still value to including a pedestrian count at A-level, just depending how you use it. The 4th one on the top 5 charts is a land use survey. And a land use survey is also a very traditional form of geography data collection. And very often teachers encourage students to use something called rice pots, where they try to classify the land use of an area into 8 different distinctions. RICE POTS is an acronym, and it stands for residential, industrial, commercial. I'll stop there before I get it wrong. I think it might be entertainment next. But the idea is that you have these different distinctions of land use, and when you're in different areas of a particular space, you make a judgment as to how that area best fits into one of those 8 different land uses. So land use can change over time, and obviously it can change depending how far or close you are into the middle of a settlement or a development, and it can be quite an ideal form of qualitative data to get an idea about different functions of a place. 3rd one is one that some people dread, some people embrace and love and end up having conversations with people who turn out to be, lifelong friends. Questionnaires are ones that have been around for a long time. Doing a geography questionnaire is often something that your parents will probably talk to you about when they think about fieldwork. And I would say that although there might be some cases where you might fear doing a questionnaire, that actually speaking to people is very often the best form of data collection. And if you do have the confidence to speak to people and organise questions that are appropriate and crucially relevant as well to what it is that you're hoping to find out, questionnaires and interviews are a magnificent source of information, and there are ways in which you can use this information by kind of coding the results that you get and the answers that you get, or presenting them in a variety of graphs. Questionnaires definitely still have a place in geography fieldwork. Now, one of the things that we might be able to do over the coming months is be a bit more creative about how we get this information verbally from people. And it might well be that you could do Zoom interviews with people that are going to be relevant to your study. Or it could be that you develop things like online surveys. Maybe you can make a questionnaire on Google Forms or on SurveyMonkey, and then you can attach this questionnaire onto an online forum like Facebook or nextdoor.co.uk, and that may well be an appropriate way of you gathering your questionnaire data. So don't rule that out. It could be that we're just a bit more creative about how you gather your questionnaires. So we come down to the top two. This is getting tense now. Which are going to be the top two most popular methods of fieldwork data collection? Well, the second one surprised me, but I'm glad it's there. The second one are field sketches. Again, some people might think I'm rubbish at art. I pick geography, not art. I can't draw. Doesn't really matter. In geography, you're not marked on the quality of your actual drawings. It's more about the quality of the annotations that you add to your drawings. And your field sketch is literally where you're just trying to get the basics of the landscape that's in front of you down. And there is still definitely real value to including field sketches. But in addition to that, most of you have got a smartphone in your pocket that has got a very good camera on it. And taking pictures of the landscapes that you're investigating and then later using those pictures and annotating those is just as good as a field sketch. And so, you know, don't be afraid to use annotated photos or field sketches in an A-level study. They're completely appropriate. And actually, even at university level, students are taught the skills of doing field sketches and annotating photographs. So number one, here it is, the top method of data collection for fieldwork for geography students in the UK is currently, according to our short survey, the classic Environmental Quality Survey, or EQS, as the fans of this method like to call it. An environmental quality survey is a way of gauging, as it's kind of the answers on the tin really, the quality of the environment in a number of different locations. And there's a huge amount of ways in which you can design this and lay it out. I'll show you a couple of examples during this session. But this is a very much a method that you can make bespoke to you by adding your own criteria, your own scales. And you'd also, when you're doing an environmental quality survey, key thing to remember about an environmental quality survey is that it's all relative. And if you only ever do one of these, then that's not enough. You need to perhaps have a perspective where you do one in one location and you compare that to another location. So an environmental quality survey gives you in total an overall score about the quality of the environment in one place, but that's only really useful if you can then compare that to the quality of the environment somewhere else. And the best environmental quality surveys are where you do that in lots of locations, so you can see how that changes across a given location. Okay, so that gives us a bit of an idea. Going back to this page then, this was one of the slides that we covered in the previous session, in session 3. And I said that this is the very kind of basic structure or template of designing a geography report. And we said obviously that your first challenge is to come up with your title, having picked the issue that you want to investigate. Then you have these supporting sub-questions, and I said that most students will pick 3. It might be 2 or 4, but most students pick 3. And then your challenge then, once you've got these 3 sub-supporting questions, is to come up with appropriate methods to answer those sub-questions and to allocate methods to those boxes there that you've got. When we showed you this example here, we're talking about kind of a mock example of somebody doing an essay on the best teaching departments at their school. And you can see in the boxes there where it says methods that they've allocated 2 different methods to each sub-question. And again, I suggest that might be something that you do. It might well be though for one of your sub-questions you just have one method. It might be that your questionnaire or an interview covers it and you don't necessarily need to have 2 or 3 methods to answer that one sub-question. But holistically, when you look at the methods that have been chosen overall, there should be a mixture between qualitative and quantitative, so numerical based counting, almost measuring surveys, and there should be some that are gathering more qualitative or written or wordy responses. So we've got those kind of qualitative, quantitative mixtures. It doesn't have to be a complete balance, And the other thing that you'll probably expect to find more of in the NEAs that are going to be issued for your year, this coming year, is that it will probably be more secondary data supporting your primary data than on previous NEA submissions. And so you'll need to then think again with the sub-questions that you've got, what secondary data can you gather to help you answer that question? So with that in mind, your challenge at this stage then is to pick the methods that you will use. And the exercise that we did at the start of this session kind of showed that most of you guys have probably done 5 or 6 methods of geography fieldwork in your GCSE and Key Stage 3 careers so far. So you have been exposed to some methods, but you're going to want to have more of a menu really of methods that you can pick from and consider when you're planning your NEA. And so this is one of the things that we've put together. You'll find this on our website. We've got this document where we've highlighted some other human methods of data collection, and you can kind of look and zoom into those methods. And although it might be quite difficult for you to see on the screen at the moment, when you have a look at the kind of the PDF version of this document, you'll be able to see that underneath the name of each of those methods there, it describes what that method is, tells you how you could use it, and also in which scenarios and which studies those methods might be appropriate. So in total there, I think there's about 25 different human methods. It's not an exhaustive list at all. There are definitely more methods of data collection that you can use in addition to the ones that are shown on that methods menu there. But that will perhaps give you an idea about some of the other methods that you haven't used before and things that you could perhaps consider. Another thing that we've also got on our website are some coastal methods. So these are some of the ones at a selection that I've just picked out and just kind of made those a bit bigger. Again, with those, there's a bit of a description about how you could gather those methods of data and then when it might be useful to use those depending on what kind of studies you're doing. So there are a fair few ideas available on this website for you to have a look at and to consider. I'll say though, another thing that we'll do a session on as one of these kind of virtual lessons is on using technology to gather your geography fieldwork. And one of the things that we spent a lot of time on a couple of years ago was trying to develop the first proper geography fieldwork app. And we have now, it's been up and running for over a year. This is Jogit, and Jogit is the kind of designated fieldwork app. And on Jogit, we have loaded up 35 different methods of geographical data collection. And essentially what this means is that on your phone, whether it's an Android or an iPhone, you can actually be collecting your data directly onto your phone. You can be storing it on your phone. It then gets built into a behind the scenes Excel spreadsheet, which is then automatically sent to you when you've completed your fieldwork, and you've then already got your data in an electronic format. And crucially as well, it's geolocated as well, so the coordinates of where you've taken your fieldwork is logged too, which enables you to make GIS maps. So all of that sounds a bit technical. It is a little bit, I suppose, and so that's why I'm going to do a kind of specific video on using technology to help with your NEAs, and Jogit is one of those things that I'd absolutely recommend that you use. But just at a glance at this stage, Jogit might well be something that's useful to have a look at to give you again an idea about some additional methods of data collection that you can use for your study. Another thing at this stage which I think is worth me just documenting is this guide here. I've got my own copy here, and I look after that because it's excellent. This is something that was published by the Royal Geographical Society, I think probably about a year and a half or so ago, and this is downloadable from Google, and you can just see there, I've just screenshotted what I typed into Google, and this is the first result that you get up, and it's a PDF. It's quite a hefty PDF, there's quite a lot of pages, and so maybe just save it somewhere where you can electronically access it rather than perhaps printing it off. But it has every different section that you would need to access for your NEA, but has lots of good ideas about different methods of data collection, lots of ways in which you could present your data as well, and also really has good explanations about using stats tests in your NEA and when various stats tests might be suitable and supporting of what you're trying to do. So I would definitely recommend, if you haven't been told to, I'd recommend having a look at this guide. Okay, so this session is really all about you choosing the methods of data collection which are going to be appropriate and relevant to your sub-questions. And it's also about giving you a bit more awareness about the types of data and information that you can collect. Now, what we're not going to do, because it would take us forever, is literally go through every single method of data collection that you can use. And also, one of the things that we don't want to do is to kind of just force methods of data collection on you. It should be almost that you are thinking about the information that you need to gather, and then you almost kind of design your own bespoke methods of data collection. And these ideas that we're about to go through could hopefully give you a little bit more of an idea that actually you can tweak established methods of data collection to suit your own study. You could perhaps change the scale and the spectrums and the words and maybe the sampling techniques that are being encouraged. And so one of the things that you need to think about with your fieldwork is that not only does your title and the study need to be bespoke to you, but you should also think about the methods of data collection that you're using being bespoke to you as well, and you putting your own angle on them. Jogit is a fantastic tool for gathering data, but you might well look at some of those methods on Jogit and think, actually, I want to change that and I want to make that a little bit more unique to me. So there is an environmental quality survey, for instance, on Jogit, but within Jogit there are criteria already set amongst it, and it's on a scale of 1 to 5, those criteria. So you might well think, well, I want to do it on a scale of 1 to 10 and I'm not quite happy with the words that are being used in there. So that's fine. Use it as a bit of an inspiration and as a bit of an idea about the types of things you can measure, but then do your own and come out with your own spectrums and your own unique take on some of the surveys that are out there for you to use. So with that in mind, I'm just going to start with this one here, and I'm going to go through several more. And the idea of me going through some of these selections of data collection methods is to kind of highlight some of the things that you could do to kind of make yours a little bit more bespoke. So one of the top 5 methods of data collection that we highlighted from our Twitter survey was a pedestrian count. Now, a pedestrian count is fine, but it doesn't give you a huge amount of information. And one of the things that you could do is to kind of tweak and tailor a pedestrian count to make it more valuable. So if you're doing a study, for instance, on something like identity, and one of the things you could potentially try to do is identify the age structure of people in the location that you're investigating. So you could, to try and gauge the ages of people in that location, you could go up to them and say, excuse me, would you mind telling me how old you are? You might be a bit weird doing that though, and they might think that that's a bit odd, and it is a bit odd, so I wouldn't do it. So what I would do instead is try to devise a way of discreetly doing that, and you could do this sitting down, which is always nice. Find a bench or somewhere that you can sit in a location and discreetly make observations as to the age of people that you can see using that space. It might be that you do this as a time survey, perhaps over 5 minutes, and over 5 minutes, rather than just literally tallying the people to give you a collective pedestrian count number, you could make that more useful by trying to allocate approximate ages to the people that you can see in that location as well. So on this scale here, we have divided people up into 5 categories. Depressing. So you've got the youngsters between 0 and 20. You've got the young adults, 21 to 40. Above that, I don't know what you'd call that group, 41 to 60s. And then you've got 61 to 80, and you've got 80 plus. So we've decided for one of our key stage 3 studies to use this 5-step kind of step spectrum, because we felt that that was age brackets that were fairly easy to identify people in. If you had kind of brackets of 5, so you had 0 to 5, 5 to 10, that would be fairly straightforward for getting people's ages accurate when they're younger. But when people get into their 30s and 40s, it's much more difficult for you to accurately estimate somebody's age. I'll give you an example. Can you estimate my age? If you said 23, you bang on. Well done. Okay, so this is a way in which you could potentially enhance a pedestrian count by turning it into a pedestrian age survey. And what you might expect then is that the results that you get would fit with the population pyramid for that location. And as I mentioned on a previous session, parallel.co.uk is a fantastic website that you can visit, and you can get a pedestrian count, a population pyramid for every single location. And that's what we've got there on the right hand side of the screen. And therefore, we would expect that when we're doing a pedestrian age survey, that it would correlate with the population pyramid for that location. So there are a number of limitations to this, and actually one of the things that is quite useful to get in the mindset of early on when you're doing fieldwork is having limitations and weaknesses to methods is not a problem. The problem is where you try to pretend that there aren't weaknesses and limitations to methods. And actually it's quite a good thing to have limitations, because that then gives you quite a lot of things to talk about in terms of the reliability of your data. And as long as you can say that you're aware that this method of data collection isn't necessarily the strongest, and these are some of the limitations of it, then that's fine, because it isn't expected that your fieldwork should be black and white, watertight, scientifically accurate. And for a lot of human methods of data collection especially, they can be quite vague, and they might not necessarily be scientifically black and white accurate, 100% reliable. But having an awareness that they're not reliable is the key thing, and talking about the limitations and weaknesses of them is the important thing that you do. So a pedestrian age survey has definitely got weaknesses. It's definitely not bulletproof, but you can still use it as long as you're aware of the weaknesses of it. This one is a really easy, nice thing to do. Then and now photos. I think it's the second on the list, photographs and field sketches. And using photographs and field sketches is a great way of looking at change over time and how things have perhaps changed, how identities might have changed. And one of the things that you can very easily do on Google and probably lots of other websites is find historic pictures of the places that you're investigating and try and get a selection of these, and then try and replicate the exact view in the modern day. And if you can then compare that view side by side of the past and present view, you can look at physically how the area has changed and what things have remained the same. And it's a very nice kind of visual way, particularly in the early stages perhaps of your NEA, to look at the change over time, if that's one of the things that your study is focusing on. Quite a few teachers got back to me and said that one of the things that they do with their Key Stage 3 students with a local town study is this thing called a clone town survey. And this isn't one of the methods that we have got on Jogit because it's slightly more complex, but it's a really useful thing to look at. Again, if you Google clone town survey, this I think is the first result that comes up, and it's a PDF that you can download. And on one side it has a kind of a table that you fill in, and on the other side it has the step-by-step guide as to how to complete a clone town survey. Ultimately, it will give you a score. Having done this kind of fieldwork method, you'll get a score, and that score will tell you how unique that town is, or that town's high street is, in comparison to other towns in the country. Now, it might well be that you are able to access historical data to show what your high street was like historically. So in Southwold, for instance, in Suffolk, where we're based, we have a fantastic website which allows us to look at the use of every single commercial building in the town, dating back to about 150 years. So actually we've been able to produce clone town surveys for our high street, not just in 2020, but in 2010, 2000, 1990, any year in fact we could do a clone town survey of. So we can see how over time Southwold's high street has become more of a clone to other high streets in the country because it has seen an increasing rise in chain stores coming into the high street. So a clone town survey is brilliant, and if you can do some digging, some secondary research, it may well be possible that you can do a clone town survey not just for 2020 but over time as well. So that's one that perhaps would help you looking at how, again, identity and change over time has impacted your area. The mood meter is something which has actually been developed from theory which has been, I think, developed by an American psychologist, and they came up with this idea that there is a spectrum of words that can be allocated from the most negative to the most positive, and any given place, whether it's indoors or outdoors, can have an atmosphere to it or a mood associated with it. So for instance, this room that I'm currently in at the moment is excited and, you know, enthused, and hopefully your room that you're watching this in is also, you know, bustling, inspired, buoyant, and just eager to get out there and complete fieldwork. Now, if you look at the grid that you've got there on your screen, select the word now that you are actually feeling. Hopefully you're not feeling sad or bleak, but you're feeling cheerful, maybe buoyant, upbeat. So that's the same with a space, whether it's indoors or outdoors. If you're going to a town or a city or a beach, that area will have an atmosphere that you can give to it. And this is something that planners are conscious of, and they try when they're creating regeneration projects or redevelopment projects to not only create successful commercial and residential spaces, but to also create a pleasant atmosphere in places that encourage people to be there and aren't hostile or negative in any way. So one of the things that you can try and do to assess the identity and the success of regeneration, or, you know, the identity of places, is to actually consider the mood of that place. And again, I've spoken earlier about things being slightly vague and not necessarily hugely scientific. Well, this is kind of as wishy-washy as it gets, but that doesn't necessarily mean you shouldn't do it. A mood meter can be made more reliable if you give other people the opportunity to contribute to the survey that you're doing. If you just went to a high street and stood there, closed your eyes for a second and just took it all in and said, yeah, I reckon this is okay, and that then was your result, then that's pretty limited. But if you asked 100 people, if you said to them, look, I've got this scale here, would you mind just thinking and telling me which word on this scale you think best fits the atmosphere of this place currently? And if you got 100 of those responses, then all of a sudden that becomes much more valid, much more useful in your study. So again, the mood meter is something that is on Jogit, but on Jogit we have this set of words. It might well be that you take inspiration from that and you say, okay, I quite like that idea, but I'm going to make this a bit more bespoke to me, and I'm going to make my own spectrum. I'm actually going to have 50 words, and these are going to be my words, and on the top right-hand side are going to be the ones that are most positive. On the bottom left-hand side are going to be the ones that are most negative. What you potentially could then do is to perhaps have that grid laminated. It doesn't have to be laminated, but it's nice if it is. And you could then perhaps say to people on the street from a safe distance, would you mind just kind of saying which word on this grid best fits the atmosphere that you think this place represents? You might think about other ways in which you could perhaps get people to contribute to that without physically actually speaking to them. So it might be that you create an online survey and you have 10 pictures of the town that you're investigating or the location that you're investigating, and you let people see those 10 pictures, and at the end of those 10 picture slideshow, for instance, you then give them this grid and you say, having seen those pictures of this town, what word do you think perhaps best fits the mood that has been created in this environment? And they could then just select the word from your list. So a mood meter is again a different way of collecting qualitative opinion-based data, and it can be made much more useful and much more valid if you get more people to contribute to that survey. You can just see on a screen above my head that one of the other things that you might need to consider with some of the methods of data collection that you do are the external factors beyond your control that will influence the reliability of the results that you get. So, for instance, when you're doing coastal studies, if you're doing things like longshore drift measurements, one of the factors that's beyond your control and that will influence your results is the strength of the wind and the strength of the waves, and also the state of the tide on the time, on the days and the times on those days that you're measuring your results. With something like a mood meter, if you're asking people to give you a judgment as to what their opinion is on the mood or atmosphere of a place, one of the things inevitably that will give them a kind of something to factor into or influence their opinions will be the weather on the day. And if it's a very nice hot sunny day, people are generally going to feel much more positive about the place. If it's pouring with rain, again, that's going to have a negative impact. It might well be as well that you have people saying things more negatively at the moment because of the current situation with the coronavirus. So that is an external factor beyond your control. So these are the kind of small details that actually show that you're really thinking about the validity and the reliability of the data that you're collecting. And I would suggest that as they're coming into your head, you should make a note of those, because when it comes to your evaluations, when you're talking about how good your data is, which is what your fieldwork is kind of really trying to encourage you to do, is to reflect on how good your data is, then the more kind of things that you can say like that actually the accuracy was impacted by this, or the reliability might have been impacted by this, then you'll get more credit for it. So a mood meter is a good way of kind of highlighting some of those issues. Okay, so this is quite a nice method to consider, and the reason that I've included this one is that there are a number of things that you can do just by looking at vehicles that give you an indication about ownership and the identity of people in a particular place, and also success of a particular place depending on number of vehicles. But there's quite a lot of car surveys that you can do at a safe distance without actually having to physically speak to people. Just make sure, obviously, if you're doing any kind of car-based survey, that vehicle's not moving and there's nobody in it, because if you're standing with a clipboard or a phone and you're kind of making details about a vehicle, you don't want to get into a confrontation with the person that's driving it or who owns it. Now, this method here is something called a car reg survey. Now, you may or may not know that all cars have a registration plate on the front of them. I'm sure you know that. And unless those cars have got personalised registration plates, then you can actually get quite a bit of information from the numbers and the letters that are on that number plate. So the first two letters relate to where that vehicle has been registered and where it was first purchased. So this one here has got AV. Now, any vehicle that starts with the letter A has been first registered in the Anglian region of Norfolk and Suffolk. So we know that in Southwold, any vehicles in and around our town that have got an A registration plate are likely to be driven by local people. And it's much more likely that they are local people if that vehicle is newer as well. So the more new a vehicle there is, the more new it still belongs to the original owner, the person who first registered it. Now, you can get an idea about how new the vehicle is by looking at the numbers on a registration plate. So those numbers correlate with the year in which the vehicle was registered. So for instance, an 05 registration plate is 2005, and I think what the latest one, what would that be? 19 or 20? I think it must be 20 now at the latest ones, but I'm not sure this year if those registrations have been released. That's probably a question for somebody else. But the numbers on a registration plate will tell you how old that vehicle is. So we use this then for looking at potentially where people have come from to visit Southwold, our town. And we say to students that, okay, if you just base this on vehicles that are 3 years old and less, so 3, 2 or 1 year old vehicles, and you look at the first two letters of the registration plate and just take those numbers, you can then work out what proportion of vehicles are likely to be driven by local people and what proportion of vehicles are likely to be driven by people who've come from further afield. So in our location, we have a huge amount of second homeowners, and that influences the identity and the demographic makeup of the town. And one of the ways in which we can try to measure the extent of second homeowners and holiday makers is by looking at the registration plates of the vehicles in the town. It might well be that you're looking at the sphere of influence for a particular facility in your local area or a high street, and using the car registration plates might be useful for that as well. Another thing that you can think of with vehicles is maybe just actually looking at the type of vehicle that you've got, so the make and the model, the year. And if you go onto something like Auto Trader and you type in those details, the make, the model and the year of a vehicle, obviously you haven't got the mileage of it, but you will be able to have enough criteria to get an idea about how much those vehicles are valued at. So it might be that you take the details of 50 vehicles, for instance, and you write those down from one location and you compare that to 50 vehicles in another location. And you might then be able to go onto Auto Trader to get an overall average as to how much the vehicles in one location are valued at in comparison to how much the vehicles in the second location are valued at, to get an idea perhaps of how wealth varies between two different places. So this one was voted number one of the all-time geography fieldwork methods which are being completed in high schools between years 7 and 11, the Environmental Quality Survey. The reason that I've put it here is that the Environmental Quality Survey is a template for basically any kind of qualitative survey that you want to do, and it's a really useful method. So we have taken this format and used it for a huge amount of different surveys: property quality survey, a residential quality survey. It can be anything. The idea with this kind of grid is that you can come up with your own spectrums, your own scales and your own criteria. So down one hand side, or the left hand side in this instance, we've got our negative criteria, and then on the right hand side we've got a positive criteria, and then in the middle between the two we have the spectrum, and on this instance it's looking at a spectrum of 1 to 5. Now you can make your own quality surveys by coming up with your own criteria and your own spectrums, and this is something that I'd suggest you do. With the Environmental Quality Survey, again, this is generally fairly kind of subjective if you're only going to be using it yourself. So if you're going to be doing these surveys yourself, then that's fine, but that means the reliability of your data is a little bit limited to your own opinion. So you could make these perhaps more valid by asking in different locations other people to contribute to the environmental quality as well. So ultimately what you can do with the Environmental Quality Survey is gain a total score, and that total score then can be compared from one location to the other. As I say, we use the same structure to do a property quality survey, and we can do that then on different streets around the town. What we do when we're in those streets is we get the latitude and longitude coordinates of those locations and we make a note of those, and then that enables us at a later date to create a GIS, a kind of an ArcGIS map that has got the varying environmental quality scores mapped out depending on where they were located from and where they were gathered from. So you can be very creative with this and you can make it bespoke to you. This one, Footfall Survey, is probably slightly incorrectly placed within this presentation, and it perhaps could be more relevantly placed next to the pedestrian age survey, because this ultimately is another way in which you could tweak a pedestrian count. Rather than just randomly counting people, try and do it with some purpose and some function. So for this one, a footfall survey is where you perhaps try to compare the amount of people visiting the different facilities and shops within a high street, and looking at footfall gives you a useful way of comparing the success of one thing in relation to another. So on our high street in Southwold, we have a number of independent stores, but we also have an increasing number of chain stores. So we have this shop called Chapman's, which has been run by a local couple for a long time, but it's the only Chapman's in the whole country, and it's very much a kind of a unique, independent, very nice newspaper or news agents selling magazines and cards and bits of stationery and things like that. 10 years ago in Southwold, we had WH Smith arrive for the first time, and most of you have been in WH Smiths, you know what they sell, but they were in direct competition with Chapman's, and unfortunately almost directly opposite them on different sides of the road as well. So a number of people, particularly newcomers into Southwold, knew about WH Smiths and were probably drawn to WH Smiths because they are familiar with it, whereas other people were perhaps more keen to support the independent store and support Chapman. So one of the things that's changing in Southwold over time is that we're seeing an increasing amount of chain stores and we're seeing a decreasing amount of independent stores. So if that was one of the issues that you might want to focus your study on, then actually doing a footfall survey to get evidence of whether more people are supporting chain stores rather than independent stores would be a nice thing to do. So you could stand for 5 or 10 minutes outside the front of these facilities and these shops, and you could literally make a survey, or a survey which enables you to tally the amount of people that are going in these stores during that time. Again, you might need to think about how you would increase the reliability of doing this, and would you need to repeat this survey more than once? I'd suggest that yes, you probably would. You might need to repeat it over different days as well, just so you don't get any kind of anomalies. One of the ways in which you could tweak this as well is you could maybe perhaps do a shopping bag exit survey. So yes, people might be going into Chapman's, but are they spending money in Chapman's? Are people then going into WH Smith's and spending money in WH Smith's? So one of the things you could look at, again discreetly, is how many people are emerging from these shops actually carrying things that they've bought, whether they're in shopping bags or whether it's obvious that they're carrying a newspaper or a magazine. So it might well be, again, that you're discreetly able to make a judgment, an assumption about the trade that these stores are doing by doing a shopping bag exit survey. That is literally a method of data collection that I've just come up with. And that is what I'm saying that you could perhaps try to do. Try to make up some of your own methods of data collection, having got inspiration from other more established methods of data collection that already exist, like the classic pedestrian count. How could you tweak that pedestrian count to make it more relevant to the study that you're actually ultimately choosing to do? Okay. Soundscaping. I mentioned earlier that the mood meter was a little bit vague and a little bit wishy-washy. Well, actually, this is a different level. Soundscaping is where you could, if you wanted to, you could go into a location, you kind of close your eyes, get at one with the area around you, and you just try and be as quiet as possible for a few minutes. And you start making a note of all of the different noises that you can hear that are kind of contributing to the overall background noise that is present in that area. Now, obviously, depending where you are, whether you're in an urban area or a more natural, perhaps countryside area, those noises are going to be different. And it might well be that in urban areas you would expect those noises to be more man-made, more artificial. But your first challenge is to write down all of the different noises that you can hear. Then, and this is where it is less scientific, approximately try to attribute a percentage to each of those noises in terms of how much out of the total noise that you can hear that they are contributing. So you can see in this little example that we've got here on the left hand side that 50% of the noise in this location this person considered to be made up from traffic, 10% from people talking, of street music, seagulls, and also machines obviously somewhere in the background too. So they've presented that on what's called a tree map, which is a little bit similar, I suppose, to a pie chart. It's just a different shape. The grid has got 100 squares in it representing the percentage that you're allocating to the contribution of each of these different sounds. That is a very nice visual way of presenting the noises in different areas. And again, you could perhaps have a base map or an aerial picture, for instance, and then you could layer on these tree maps and draw a line to where you've done that survey to show how the different sounds vary in different locations. Particularly useful if you're doing an environmental survey, or maybe if you're looking at the environmental impact of a development, for instance. Now, this in its own, again, is quite unscientific, unreliable in terms of its accuracy. So one of the things that you could do to enhance the accuracy of a soundscaping is use a decibel counter or a decibel meter on your phone. And these are free to download. There's one built into the Jogit app as well if you're going to use that. And what they do is they use the microphone on your phone to gauge and to record the sound levels in the area that you're in. So if you're doing a soundscaping survey, you could also then, once you've done that, gather the actual accurate decibel reading for the location that you're in. So to do a decibel reading, you'd need to set a time period. It might be 1 minute, might be 2 minutes, might be longer, might be that you repeat it several times, but ultimately you'd come up with your final number that represents the sound levels in that location. You could allocate that to the tree map for that location as well, and then you could repeat that in several different locations. So again, it's trying to enhance the accuracy and reliability of the data that you're collecting. A beach profile. This is an absolute classic, again, for lots of teachers that are taking their students to coastal locations. I wonder if you can name the bits of equipment that you need to complete a beach profile. That's a quick geography fieldwork question. I'm going to give you 5 seconds to do that. There's a clue up there in the screen, that student holding something there. All right. Hopefully, you said ranging poles. Those are the red and white, often red and white sticks or poles that you hold. You need 2 ranging poles to complete a beach profile. Generally, you need a tape measure and also you need something called a clinometer as well. So I'm not going to speak in detail about how to conduct a beach profile. You'll be able to find that out from various different clips that already exist on YouTube, and also from the guide that the RGS have issued. But the reason that I wanted to show you this is that for beach profiles and for a number of the methods of data collection that you are choosing, one of the things that I would suggest that you do is to take a photograph of the thing that you're investigating as well. So if you're doing a clone town survey, make sure that you've got a picture of that high street. If you're doing property quality survey, take pictures of the residential streets that you're investigating. If you're doing a beach profile, which is where you're trying to draw a graph essentially to represent the profile of the beach, why would you not also take a picture of the profile of the beach? And it might well be that you could layer the one on top of the other, or you could certainly have them on the same page when you're talking about the profile of the beach. So these things in your pockets, these mobile phones, are absolute assets, and don't be told that they're not. They can really contribute to geography fieldwork. They can enable you to take pictures, they can enable you to record sound levels, they can enable you to record interviews, and obviously using the apps that we've developed, they can enable you to gather a huge amount of information as well and store that electronically. So don't be afraid to use the technology as well as the classic technology that you are encouraged to use when you field work. And with that in mind, it might well be some of you, if you're very lucky, might know somebody that's got access to a drone, who might know somebody that has taken pictures of a particular place aerially, but has got a nice camera, and it doesn't have to be up in the air, but it could be just ones that are mounted on the ground. But using pictures and using field sketches are a really useful thing to still do in a geography study, and they are things that enable you to annotate and bring the fieldwork location that you're investigating to life. So no matter what your study is, I would suggest that you do include field sketches or photographs of the location that you're investigating, that you annotate these pictures and you really use them to bring the area to life, as I say. So it might be an idea like we've got in this little field sketch down there in the middle of the screen, that you make a note of the time and the date which you did your photograph, or you did your field sketch, perhaps the weather conditions and any other kind of external factors which might be relevant, and perhaps you put a title as well to show exactly where that location is. It might be that you take the latitude and longitude coordinates of where you've taken that picture or done that drawing from as well. So there you go. There's a few ideas. One of the things then that we do as part of one of the A-level courses in Southwold with students who are trying to kind of increase their understanding of fieldwork is we do an activity where we give them an inquiry question. We give them a kind of an example sub-question. So there's one there at the top of the screen. How has increased second home ownership changed the identity of Southwold? Then we just tell them to go off around the town and complete a range of different, almost random methods of data collection. This helps them obviously learn more methods of data collection. But one of the things that we then ask them to do once they come back into the classroom is to then try and be a bit reflective and to think about how reliable those bits of data collection are. So this is one of the things that when you're doing your planning, you're going to need to try and think about. Is the data that I'm collecting reliable? And if not, how can I make it more reliable and more useful? How can I make it more accurate? What are the things that are affecting its accuracy? And how can I make it more accurate? And the other thing, which is probably at this stage more relevant, particularly at the early planning stage, is which bits of data collection that you're planning to do are actually relevant to the question that you've been given. So one of the things you've got to ensure is that when you're doing and taking the time to plan and to conduct fieldwork, that the results and the fieldwork that you're completing is actually helping you and is going to be answering your study. Because if you're doing something and it actually isn't relevant to the study, really no point in doing it at all and spending any time on it. So we tell these students to go off and complete their 10 surveys, and then we kind of redirect them back to the sub-question that we have set them. And then we give them the challenge of them being reflective and thinking about then which of these methods that you've just done are actually relevant and helping you answer that sub-question. And that then encourages them to critically reflect on what they've done and actually think, well, actually there's no point doing those, there's no point doing that one or that one, but that one was really good, that one was really relevant, and so too was that one. It might well be that they just get it down to 2 or 3 of those methods and they pick those. And that in a way is kind of the process that you've got at the moment. You hopefully now will go out and look at the different methods of data collection that are available to you, the things that you can pick off that menu almost of Fieldwork. You then look again at what your sub-questions are and you think, yeah, okay, that method would help me answer that sub-question, and that method would help me answer that sub-question. And that's the process now that you've got as your next challenge. So we're going to leave it at that. Go back to this again. This is your holy grail. You've got hopefully here your title, you've got your supporting sub-questions. This is the bit now that we're encouraging you to do, is to think about what methods of data collection that are available could you do to be relevant to those sub-questions. And if there aren't any methods that you can see that are available, that are kind of already being talked about, or on Jogit, or on the RGS guide, or on the documents that you can access from anywhere else, are there any methods of data collection that you can create that can be completely bespoke to you? And if so, come up with them, be creative, and allocate them to the sub-question that they are relevant to. So that's your next challenge. Good luck with that, and we'll see you for